Ambassador Chenwei walked through the gleaming corridors of the Galactic Council headquarters one last time. Her footsteps echoed softly against the crystalline walls that stretched high above her head. The building was a marvel of engineering, with its floating platforms and streams of light that carried information between different levels. Most beings who visited here felt small and intimidated by the grand architecture. Chen had felt that way too during her first visit 20 years ago. Now she felt nothing but quiet determination. Chen carried a simple datapad in her hands. The device looked plain compared to the fancy holographic displays that other species preferred. But it contained something that would shake the foundation of galactic civilization, though nobody knew it yet. The council chambers were busy as always. Delegates from hundreds of different worlds filled the curved seating areas. Their voices created a constant buzz of conversation in dozens of languages. Translation devices worked overtime to keep everyone understanding each other. The air shimmered with the heat from various species that needed different environmental conditions to survive. In the center of the room, Councillor HFY of the Serpentine Dominion was giving another speech about trade routes. His snake-like body coiled around the speaking platform as he gestured with his forearms. The Serpentines controlled most of the shipping lanes in the Outer Rim territories. They liked to remind everyone about their importance every chance they got. The prosperity of our galaxy depends on maintaining stable trade relationships, HFY declared. His forked tongue flicked out as he spoke, tasting the air for chemical signals that might tell him how the audience was reacting. We must not allow minor disruptions to affect our carefully balanced economy. Several delegates nodded in agreement. The tall, blue-skinned Altarians whispered among themselves in their musical language. The crystalline Nexari clicked their approval, their bodies chiming like wind instruments. Even the massive Kepler representatives who looked like walking boulders rumbled their support. Chen waited patiently for HFY to finish his speech. She had heard similar words countless times over the years. The major species always talked about stability and balance, but they meant their own stability and their own balance. Humanity had learned long ago that they were expected to listen more than speak in these chambers. When HFY finally concluded and slithered back to his seat, the council moved on to other business. They discussed mining rights on asteroid belts, argued about territorial boundaries, and debated regulations for deep space exploration. Chen listened to it all with half her attention while reviewing the document on her datapad one final time. The document was only 3 pages long. It contained humanity's formal notice of withdrawal from all galactic treaties, trade agreements, and cooperative arrangements. The language was polite but firm. There were no accusations or complaints, no dramatic declarations or angry demands. It simply stated that humanity was choosing to end their participation in galactic civilization, effective immediately. Chen had spent months preparing this moment. She had coordinated with human colonies across 12 different star systems. Every human settlement, research station, and trading post had received their instructions. When she filed this document, it would trigger a carefully planned exodus that had been years in the making. The irony was not lost on her. Humanity had joined the Galactic Council with great hope and excitement 2 centuries ago. They had dreamed of partnership, of learning from older and wiser civilizations, of contributing to something greater than themselves. Those dreams had died slowly, killed by 1,000 small cuts of indifference and dismissal. Humans were always given the jobs that nobody else wanted. They maintained the atmospheric processors that kept agricultural worlds habitable. They serviced the communication relays that connected distant star systems. They operated the waste recycling plants and the water purification facilities. They repaired the environmental systems and managed the power grids. The work was vital, but it was not glamorous. Other species saw humans as useful but unremarkable. They were reliable workers who could handle boring technical tasks. They did not have the military might of the Nexari, the economic power of the Serpentines, or the advanced technology of the Altarians. In the grand scheme of galactic politics, humanity was just another minor species that could be safely ignored. That attitude had become clear during the Rigel crisis 5 years ago. A solar flare had damaged the terraforming equipment on 3 human agricultural colonies. Crops were failing and thousands of people faced starvation. Chen had pleaded with the council for emergency aid, but the debate had dragged on for months while politicians argued about jurisdiction and liability. The colonies had saved themselves in the end. Human engineers had worked around the clock to repair the damaged systems using salvaged parts and creative solutions. They had prevented disaster through sheer determination and ingenuity. The Council had eventually voted to provide aid, but by then it was no longer needed. Chen had realized something important during that crisis. Humanity did not need the Council's permission to survive and thrive. But the Council needed humanity more than they understood. Over the past 5 years, Chen had quietly documented just how deeply human expertise had become woven into galactic infrastructure. Human technicians maintained the quantum computers that ran interstellar banking systems. Human engineers had designed the safety protocols for most space stations. Human scientists had developed the medical equipment used in hospitals across dozens of worlds. The other species had become dependent on human knowledge and skills without even realizing it. They saw the maintenance work as menial labor, not understanding the sophisticated expertise it required. They took the smooth operation of their technology for granted, never thinking about the humans who made it all possible. Now it was time for them to learn. Chen stood up and made her way to the filing station. The device looked like a simple pillar of light, but it was connected to every government database in the galaxy. When she inserted her datapad, the withdrawal notice would be instantly transmitted to all relevant authorities. She hesitated for just a moment before making the connection. Once this was done, there would be no going back. Humanity would be on its own in the vast darkness of space, just as they had been before first contact with galactic civilization. But Chen had faith in her species. Humans had survived ice ages and asteroid impacts on their home world. They had built civilizations and torn them down and built them again. They had reached for the stars when everyone said it was impossible. They would find a way to thrive without the Council's help. The data transfer completed with a soft chime. Somewhere in the depths of the government computers, automated systems were already beginning to process humanity's withdrawal. Within hours, the news would reach human settlements across the galaxy. The exodus would begin. Chen walked out of the council chambers without looking back. Around her, the daily business of galactic government continued unchanged. Delegates argued about trade regulations and territorial disputes, completely unaware that their comfortable world was about to collapse. In 6 months, they would understand what they had lost. But by then, humanity would be gone, and it would be too late to ask them to stay. The greatest exodus in galactic history had begun, and nobody had even noticed. 3 weeks had passed since Ambassador Chen Wei filed humanity's withdrawal notice. The Galactic Council had barely acknowledged the paperwork. A few minor officials had sent automated responses confirming receipt of the documents. Most delegates assumed it was just another bureaucratic procedure that would eventually be forgotten. Councillor Vexhai was reviewing trade reports in his office when the first crisis alert reached his desk. The message came from Kepler-7, one of the major agricultural worlds in the Outer Rim. The planet's atmospheric processors were showing dangerous instability readings. Vexhai's forearms moved quickly across his desk display, pulling up more detailed information. Kepler-7 was responsible for feeding 12 other star systems. Any disruption to their food production would affect millions of lives. The planet's atmosphere required constant adjustment to maintain the right balance of gases for both native plants and imported crops. The atmospheric processors were massive machines that stood like metal mountains across Kepler-7's continents. They had run flawlessly for over 50 years, filtering and adjusting the air composition with precision that impressed even the most advanced species. The technology was not particularly complex by galactic standards, but it required careful maintenance and regular updates to function properly. According to the crisis report, 3 of the main processors had started producing irregular gas mixtures. The changes were small but growing worse each day. If the trend continued, the atmospheric balance would shift, enough to kill the crops and make parts of the planet uninhabitable for most species. Vexhai immediately contacted the maintenance company, responsible for the processors. A holographic Altarian appeared above his desk, her crystalline features flickering with concern. "We have sent our best technicians to investigate," she said in her musical voice, "but we are encountering unexpected difficulties. The processor control systems are more complex than our records indicated. Our specialists cannot access the primary diagnostic functions." This confused Vexhai. The atmospheric processors used standard galactic technology. Every major engineering firm should have been able to service them without problems. "What do you mean they cannot access the systems?" "The control interfaces require authorization codes that are not in our databases. the Altarian explained. There are also custom modifications to the software that we do not understand. Our technicians are working to bypass these restrictions, but progress is slow. Vexhai felt the first stirring of unease in his belly. He had never heard of atmospheric processors being so difficult to repair. Who installed these systems originally? The Altarian's image flickered as she accessed her files. According to our records, the processors were manufactured by Nexari Industries, but installed and configured by human technical teams. The humans also handled all maintenance and upgrades for the past 30 years. The unease in Vexhai's belly grew stronger. He remembered seeing human technicians working on various systems throughout the galaxy, but he had never paid much attention to their activities. Maintenance work was beneath the notice of important political figures like himself. Where are the human maintenance teams now? He asked. That is the problem, the Altarian said. All human technical personnel departed Kepler 7 2 weeks ago. They said their contracts had been terminated, and they were returning to human space. We assumed new maintenance crews would replace them, but no one has arrived. Vexhai ended the call and immediately contacted his information networks. Within an hour, he had received reports from 17 different star systems. The pattern was the same everywhere. Human technical teams were abandoning their posts across the galaxy. They gave little explanation beyond stating that their contracts were no longer valid. On Altair Prime, the crystal cities were beginning to overheat. The thermal regulation systems that kept the towering structures at comfortable temperatures had started malfunctioning. Altarian engineers discovered that the cooling systems used human-designed control algorithms that they could not modify or repair. Nexari military bases were reporting problems with their weapon systems. Advanced targeting computers were producing error messages in human languages that Nexari technicians could not translate. Backup systems that should have activated automatically remained offline for unknown reasons. The Kepler mining stations were experiencing power fluctuations that threatened to shut down entire operations. The fusion reactors used safety protocols that had been updated and refined by human engineers over many years. Without proper maintenance, the reactors were automatically reducing their output to prevent potential accidents. Each individual problem seemed manageable. System failures happened occasionally in any complex civilization, but the sheer number of simultaneous issues was beginning to overwhelm repair services across the galaxy. Engineering companies that had never needed to understand certain systems suddenly found themselves facing technology they could not fix. Vexhai called an emergency meeting of the Council's Technical Advisory Committee. Representatives from the major species gathered in a secure conference room to discuss the growing crisis. The mood was tense but not yet panicked. Most delegates still believed they were dealing with coincidental equipment failures. We need to understand the scope of this problem, said Councillor Thanera of the High Collective. Her people were among the most technologically advanced in the galaxy, and she had more experience with complex systems than most. How many critical facilities are affected? The committee's chief analyst, a multi-eyed Zorian, projected a galactic map above the conference table. Red warning markers appeared on dozens of star systems. Current reports indicate problems in 47 different locations. The issues range from minor inconveniences to potential disasters. What do these locations have in common? Asked a Nexari representative, his crystalline body chiming softly as he moved. All of them employed human technical personnel within the last 5 years, the analyst replied. In most cases, humans were responsible for system maintenance, upgrades, or installation. The room fell quiet as the implications sank in. For decades, the major species had relied on human workers for technical tasks they considered beneath their notice. Nobody had realized how extensively human expertise had spread throughout galactic infrastructure. This cannot be a coincidence, Thanera said slowly. The timing matches perfectly with humanity's withdrawal from galactic treaties. They must have planned this coordinated departure. Vexhai coiled his body tighter as anger began to replace his initial confusion. Are you suggesting the humans deliberately sabotaged our systems? Not sabotaged, corrected the Zorian analyst. According to our investigations, all affected systems are functioning exactly as designed. The problems arise from lack of proper maintenance and updates. The humans simply stopped working. This revelation was almost more disturbing than sabotage would have been. It suggested that human workers had become so integral to galactic infrastructure that their absence alone could cause widespread system failures. The major species had not just employed humans. They had become dependent on them. "We need to contact human leadership immediately," declared the Nexari representative. "They must be made to understand their responsibilities. This withdrawal is causing serious problems throughout civilized space." HFY had already tried contacting human authorities. All official channels returned automated messages stating that humanity was no longer accepting communications from galactic government sources. Human colonies had gone silent. Their long-range transmitters either shut down or transmitting only basic identification signals. "They are not responding to diplomatic outreach," HFY admitted. "It appears they have severed all communication links with the Council." The committee spent the next 4 hours trying to develop solutions. They could hire new technical teams from other species, but that would take months or years. They could attempt to reverse engineer the human modifications to their systems, but that might cause even more problems. They could try to force human cooperation through economic or military pressure, but humanity had already withdrawn from all trade agreements and their military capabilities were largely unknown. As the meeting concluded, HFY realized that the Galactic Council faced a crisis unlike anything in its history. For the first time, a member species had simply walked away from galactic civilization. They had not demanded concessions or threatened war. They had not attempted to negotiate better terms or seek revenge for past grievances. They had just quietly left, taking their expertise with them, and now the galaxy was beginning to understand just how much it had lost. The communication breakdown started small, a delay of a few seconds in transmissions between star systems, barely noticeable to most users. Then the delays grew longer. Messages that should have traveled across the galaxy in minutes were taking hours to arrive. Some messages never arrived at all. Director Zeflon of the Galactic Communication Network stood in the main control center, watching display screens that showed the health of quantum relay stations throughout known space. Red warning lights blinked across the massive star map like a disease spreading through the galaxy's nervous system. "Report," Zeflon commanded. His insectoid features twitched with anxiety as he studied the failing network that had taken centuries to build. 17 relay stations have gone completely offline, reported his chief technician, a nervous Altarian whose crystal body was flickering between different colors of distress. "Another 34 are operating at reduced capacity. We are experiencing cascade failures throughout the outer rim sectors. The quantum relay stations were marvels of engineering that made instant communication across vast distances possible. Each station contained delicate equipment that had to be precisely calibrated to maintain quantum entanglement with its paired partners. The technology was well understood, but the practical implementation required constant adjustment and maintenance." "When did the stations last receive maintenance updates?" Zeflon asked, though he was beginning to suspect the answer. "Most of the failing stations were serviced by human technical teams," the technician replied. "The last maintenance logs show human personnel departing their posts approximately 4 weeks ago. Since then, the stations have been running on automated systems only." Zeflon felt his breathing spiracles clench with frustration. Like most galactic citizens, he had never paid much attention to the maintenance crews that kept the communication network running. The work happened in remote locations, performed by technicians who rarely interacted with the administrative staff. It had been easy to ignore their importance when everything was working properly. Now the network was collapsing, and Zeflon was learning just how much he had not known about his own systems. "Can we send repair teams to fix the stations?" he asked. The technician's colors shifted to deeper shades of blue, indicating extreme anxiety. "We have dispatched our best engineers, but they are encountering significant problems. The quantum calibration systems use custom software that was written and updated by human programmers. Our technicians cannot access the core functions without the proper authorization codes." "What about the backup systems?" "The backup systems were also modified by human teams. They require manual activation using procedures that were not included in our standard documentation. Our engineers are attempting to reverse engineer the processes, but quantum systems are extremely sensitive. Any mistakes could permanently damage the stations." This was becoming a recurring nightmare across the galaxy. Systems that had worked flawlessly for decades were failing because the people who understood them had disappeared. The major species had sophisticated technology and brilliant scientists, but they had grown dependent on human expertise in ways they were only now beginning to understand. The communication breakdown was just the beginning. Without reliable long-distance communication, coordination between different star systems became nearly impossible. Trade agreements could not be negotiated, military operations could not be coordinated, scientific research projects that spanned multiple worlds ground to a halt. On the industrial world of Titan IX, automated cargo handling systems began shutting down one by one. The systems had been gradually upgraded over many years by human engineers who understood both the old and new technologies. When the upgrades failed, the factories that fed half the galaxy started running out of raw materials. Medical facilities throughout civilized space faced their own crisis. Advanced diagnostic equipment that had been maintained by human specialists began producing unreliable results. Surgical robots required regular software updates that only human programmers seemed to understand. Hospital administrators who had never thought about technical maintenance suddenly found themselves dealing with equipment failures that put lives at risk. The Nexari military discovered that their most advanced warships were becoming unreliable. Weapon systems that had been designed by Nexari engineers, but modified by human contractors, were producing targeting errors. Navigation computers were displaying incorrect star charts. Even the artificial gravity systems were fluctuating in ways that made crew members sick. General Kethvar of the Nexari Defense Force stood on the bridge of the flagship Crystalline Honor, staring at displays that showed the deteriorating condition of his fleet. His body chimed with anger as he read report after report of system failures. How did this happen? He demanded of his chief engineer. These are Nexari ships built with Nexari technology. How can they be failing because some humans are not here to fix them? The engineer, a younger Nexari whose crystal formations had not yet fully matured, flickered nervously. The ships were built with Nexari technology, but they have been continuously upgraded and modified over the past 50 years. Much of that upgrade work was performed by human contractors because they offered competitive prices and reliable service. And now we discover that many of the upgrades were integrated so deeply into our systems that removing them or replacing them would require rebuilding entire ships. The humans did not sabotage anything, but they created dependencies that we did not recognize. This was the most disturbing aspect of the crisis. Humanity had not attacked galactic civilization or tried to damage its infrastructure. They had simply provided services that other species had requested, doing the work so well that it became indispensable. The major species had become dependent on human expertise through their own choices, never realizing what they were risking. The economic impact was beginning to dwarf the technical problems. Trade routes that had operated smoothly for centuries were disrupting as cargo systems failed, and communication became unreliable. The Galactic Stock Exchange experienced its worst crash in recorded history, as investors realized the scope of the infrastructure problems. Financial institutions discovered that their quantum computers, which handled trillions of transactions per day, were running on human-designed security protocols. Without regular updates, the systems were vulnerable to errors and potentially fraud. Banks began freezing accounts and halting transactions, causing panic among billions of citizens. Even basic services were affected. Water treatment plants on dozens of worlds were experiencing problems with their filtration systems. Power grids were becoming unstable as automated load balancing systems failed. Transportation networks were disrupting as traffic control computers stopped responding to commands. The Galactic Council called emergency sessions every day, but the meetings accomplished little. Delegates who had never concerned themselves with technical details were struggling to understand problems that required expertise they did not possess. Emergency funds were allocated for repair efforts, but money could not solve problems that required knowledge and experience. We need to accept the reality of our situation. Councillor Thanera told the assembled delegates during one particularly tense session. We are facing a systematic collapse of our technological infrastructure. Our civilization has become dependent on human expertise to a degree that none of us realized. The humans must be forced to return, declared Vexhai, his serpentine body coiled with frustration. They cannot simply abandon their responsibilities to galactic society. What responsibilities? Thanera asked quietly. They were contractors and employees, not slaves. We paid them to provide services, and apparently we became so dependent on those services that we cannot function without them. The fault is ours, not theirs. The harsh truth was settling over the galaxy like a cold wind. Humanity had not conquered galactic civilization through military might or economic pressure. They had made themselves indispensable through competence and reliability. providing services that other species had been happy to accept without questioning the long-term implications. Now they were gone, and the galaxy was learning what it meant to lose the quiet backbone that had held everything together. The cascade of failures was accelerating, and nobody knew how to stop it. Admiral Sektar commanded the largest search fleet in galactic history. 200 ships from 6 different species had been assembled in just 3 weeks, a testament to how desperate the situation had become. Their mission was simple in concept, but proving impossible in practice: find humanity and convince them to return. The fleet had been searching for 47 days now, following every lead and investigating every report of human activity. They had visited 12 star systems that had once housed human colonies, but they found only empty worlds and abandoned structures. Standing on the bridge of his flagship, Admiral Sektar studied the latest reports from his scout ships. His reptilian features showed the strain of weeks of fruitless searching. Each empty colony they discovered made the task seem more hopeless. "Report from Kepler-12, announced his communications officer, a multi-tentacled Zorian whose skin was showing patterns of exhaustion. "The human agricultural colony has been completely evacuated. No signs of recent activity." Sektar had expected this news, but it still frustrated him. Kepler-12 had been home to over 2 million humans just 2 months ago. The colony had produced genetically modified grains that were shipped to dozens of other worlds. Now the farms sat empty, their automated systems slowly failing without human oversight. "Any indication of where they went?" Sektar asked. "Negative, sir. The colonists removed or destroyed all navigation records before departing. They also dismantled the long-range communication equipment and took it with them." This was the same pattern they had found everywhere. Human settlements had been evacuated with military precision, leaving behind no clues about their destination. Personal belongings were gone, technical equipment had been removed or rendered inoperable, and computer systems had been wiped clean. "What about the industrial facilities?" Sektar asked. "Intact but non-functional," the communications officer reported. "The humans removed key components from all major systems before departing. The remaining equipment appears to be booby-trapped, with self-destruct mechanisms that will activate if tampered with improperly." Sektar's tail lashed with irritation. The humans had not just left. They had made sure that their former colonies could not be easily reoccupied or their technology reverse-engineered. It was a level of thoroughness that suggested months or even years of preparation. The Admiral moved to the main display screen, which showed a map of known space with search zones marked in different colors. Red zones had been completely searched with no signs of human activity. Yellow zones were still under investigation. Green zones represented areas where human colonies had been detected, but not yet reached by the search fleet. The green zones were shrinking every day as scouts reported more empty worlds. It was becoming clear that humanity had not simply relocated to a different part of known space. They had disappeared entirely, taking their knowledge and expertise with them. "Sir," called out the tactical officer, "we are receiving a priority transmission from the Council. They want an immediate status update." Sektar grimaced. The Council was growing more desperate as the infrastructure crisis worsened. Every day brought new reports of system failures and economic disruption. Pressure was mounting to find humanity quickly, but the search fleet was running out of places to look. "Put them through," Sektar ordered. The holographic image of Counselor HFY appeared above the command console. The Serpentine leader looked haggard, his scales dull with stress. Behind him, Sektar could see the chaos of the council chambers, with delegates arguing loudly in dozens of languages. "Admiral, what is your status?" HFY demanded without preamble. "We need results. The situation here is becoming critical." "We have searched 70% of known human territories," Sektar reported. "All colonies and outposts have been abandoned. We have found no trace of current human activity." "That is impossible," HFY hissed. "Hundreds of millions of humans cannot simply vanish. They must be hiding somewhere." "With respect, Counselor, our sensor sweeps have been thorough. If there were active human settlements in the searched areas, we would have detected them. The humans appear to have evacuated to regions beyond our current knowledge of galactic geography. This was the possibility that nobody wanted to acknowledge. Galactic civilization occupied only a small fraction of the galaxy, concentrated in regions with suitable star systems and established trade routes. Vast areas of space remained unexplored, considered too remote or dangerous for colonization. If humanity had retreated to those regions, finding them could take decades or centuries. What about the message? HFY asked. Have you been able to decode it? 3 days earlier, the search fleet had discovered something interesting at the former human colony on Rigel 7. A single automated beacon had been left behind, broadcasting a message in an unknown human language. Linguistic experts from across the galaxy had been working to translate it, but progress was slow. Our language specialists believe it is a variant of ancient human script, Sektar reported. Preliminary translations suggest it is a farewell message, but the full meaning remains unclear. The message was frustrating in its simplicity. Most of it appeared to be coordinates and technical specifications, but without understanding the context, the information was useless. The coordinates did not correspond to any known star systems, and the technical specifications were for equipment that no galactic species recognized. Keep working on it, HFY ordered. Any clue could lead us to them. After the transmission ended, Sektar returned his attention to the search operations. His ships were spread across multiple star systems, investigating every asteroid base and orbital station that had ever been used by human workers. The task was enormous, complicated by the fact that humans had been present in some capacity throughout most of galactic space. The search teams were finding evidence of human presence everywhere they looked, but it was all historical. Maintenance logs showed human technicians working on systems right up until the day of the Great Departure. Personal quarters contained belongings that had been abandoned in place. Cafeterias still had meals prepared for workers who never returned to eat them. It was as if humanity had simply evaporated, leaving behind only the infrastructure they had built and maintained for others. Sir, the science officer called out, we are receiving some interesting data from the investigation teams. What kind of data? Analysis of the abandoned human facilities suggests a level of coordination that is unprecedented. Every human settlement was evacuated according to the same procedures. Equipment was removed or disabled using identical methods. Even the self-destruct mechanisms follow the same design patterns. Sektar considered this information. The evacuation of hundreds of human colonies across dozens of star systems would have required enormous logistical coordination. Ships, supplies, personnel, and equipment would all need to be managed carefully to avoid detection. The operation would have taken months or years to plan and execute. Are you suggesting this was planned long in advance? He asked. The evidence suggests preparation began at least 2 years ago, the science officer confirmed. Possibly longer. The humans have been quietly preparing for this departure, while continuing to fulfill their normal duties. The level of operational security required would be extraordinary. This revelation was both impressive and disturbing. It meant that humanity had been planning their exodus for years, while maintaining normal relations with galactic civilization. They had smiled and worked and provided services while secretly preparing to abandon everyone who depended on them. But it also suggested something else. If humanity had spent years planning their departure, they had also spent years thinking about what would happen afterward. They had to have known that their absence would cause widespread problems. They had chosen to leave anyway. Continue the search, Sektar ordered. Expand the search grid to include unexplored regions. If humanity is out there, we will find them. But privately, the Admiral was beginning to doubt whether humanity wanted to be found. They had covered their tracks too well and planned too carefully. This was not a temporary withdrawal that could be reversed with negotiation or pressure. This was a permanent goodbye, and the galaxy would have to learn to live with the consequences. 6 months after humanity's disappearance, Counselor Thanera stood alone in what had been the busiest space station in the galaxy. Nexus Prime had once been a hub of commerce and diplomacy, hosting millions of beings from hundreds of different worlds. Now the corridors were dark and empty, filled only with the echoing sound of failing life support systems. The station was dying, and there was nothing anyone could do to save it. Thanera walked slowly through the abandoned marketplace where merchants from across the galaxy had once hawked their wares. Empty stalls stretched into the darkness, their holographic displays flickering weakly before finally going out. The air recycling systems coughed and wheezed, struggling to maintain breathable atmosphere for the handful of beings still aboard. She paused at a small kiosk that had sold human coffee to passing travelers. The machine was still there, but it had been silent for months. A handwritten sign in multiple languages explained that the maintenance contract had been terminated. No replacement parts were available. The owner had gone out of business. It was such a small thing, but it represented everything that had gone wrong. The humans had not just maintained the big systems that kept civilization running. They had also taken care of 1,000 small details that made life comfortable and convenient. Coffee machines, air fresheners, waste disposal units, water fountains. All the tiny pieces of technology that people used every day without thinking about who kept them working. Thanera's people, the High Collective, were among the most advanced species in the galaxy. They had mastered faster-than-light travel, created artificial intelligence, and built cities that floated in the clouds of gas-giant planets. But they could not fix a simple coffee machine because they had never bothered to learn how such mundane devices worked. The irony was painful. A soft chime from her personal communicator interrupted her thoughts. Another status report from the Emergency Coordination Center that had been established to manage the ongoing crisis. Thanera activated the device and listened to the latest updates with growing despair. Power grid failures on 7 more worlds. Medical equipment shortages affecting 32 star systems. Complete breakdown of automated cargo handling at 15 major shipping hubs. Estimated economic losses now exceed 40 trillion galactic credits. The numbers were staggering, but they did not capture the full scope of the disaster. Entire industries were collapsing as the infrastructure they depended on failed. Millions of beings were losing their jobs as factories and businesses shut down. Some worlds were facing shortages of food and medicine that threatened mass starvation and disease. The major species were trying to replace human expertise with their own people, but the process was agonizingly slow. Systems that humans had maintained effortlessly for decades required teams of specialists from other species, months or years to understand. Many technologies could not be fixed at all because the documentation had been removed or was written in human languages that few beings could read. Thanera made her way to the station's main computer core, where a small team of Altarian technicians was still trying to keep basic systems operational. The crystal beings worked frantically at their consoles, their forms flickering with stress patterns as they fought to prevent complete system failure. Status report, Thanera requested. The lead technician, an elderly Altarian whose crystal formations had grown dark with age, looked up from his work. We have managed to stabilize the life support systems for another few days, but the primary power reactor is showing critical instabilities. Without proper maintenance, it will shut down within the week. What about the backup systems? The backup systems require activation codes that were changed by human technicians last year. We have tried to bypass the security protocols, but any mistake could trigger a station-wide emergency shutdown. Thanera felt a familiar weight of despair settling over her. This conversation was almost identical to thousands of others taking place across the galaxy. Critical systems were failing because the people who understood them had vanished, leaving behind technology that was too complex or too customized for anyone else to maintain. Evacuate the station, Thanera ordered quietly. Declare it a total loss. The technician's crystal body pulsed with shock. Counselor, Nexus Prime has been the center of galactic commerce for over 2 centuries. We cannot simply abandon it. We cannot save it either, Thanera replied. How many people are we risking to maintain a facility that will inevitably fail? Better to evacuate now while we still can. It was a decision she had been forced to make dozens of times over the past months. Space stations, research facilities, industrial plants, even entire orbital cities had been abandoned because they could not be maintained safely. The proud achievements of galactic civilization were crumbling one by one, leaving behind empty monuments to their former glory. The evacuation of Nexus Prime took 3 days. Ships arrived to collect the remaining personnel and whatever valuable equipment could be safely removed. Thanera was among the last to leave, taking one final walk through the corridors that had once bustled with life and activity. As her shuttle departed, she watched through the viewport as the great station began its slow death spiral. Without proper maintenance, its orbit would gradually decay until it fell into the nearby star. In a few months, there would be nothing left but scattered debris and fading memories. The loss of Nexus Prime was symbolic of the greater catastrophe facing galactic civilization. The investigation teams had finally compiled a complete report on humanity's role in galactic infrastructure. and the results were devastating. Humans had been involved in maintaining or operating nearly 70% of all critical systems. They had designed safety protocols, written software, trained local technicians, and provided expertise that no other species possessed. For 2 centuries, humanity had quietly made itself indispensable, while appearing to be nothing more than skilled laborers. They had been the invisible foundation that supported the entire structure of galactic society. Now that foundation was gone and everything built upon it was collapsing. The political consequences were equally severe. The Galactic Council had lost all credibility as member species blamed each other for the crisis. Trade alliances were dissolving as economic disruption made cooperation impossible. Some worlds were withdrawing from galactic civilization entirely, choosing isolation over continued chaos. Military tensions were rising as species competed for the few remaining functional facilities and resources. The Nexarian Serpentines had already engaged in several small conflicts over control of working shipyards. The Kepler Confederacy had declared martial law and closed its borders to all foreign ships. The galaxy was fragmenting, returning to the scattered collection of isolated civilizations that had existed before the formation of the Council. Centuries of progress toward unity and cooperation were being undone in a matter of months. Thanera's shuttle docked with her personal ship, and she made her way to the bridge. Her crew was preparing for departure to the High Collective's home system, where she would deliver her final report to the Leadership Council. It would not be pleasant reading. "Set course for home," she ordered, settling into the command chair. "Maximum speed." As the ship jumped to faster-than-light travel, Thanera reflected on the lessons that galactic civilization had learned too late. Humanity had never sought to dominate other species through military conquest or economic manipulation. They had simply worked hard, solved problems, and made themselves useful. Other species had been happy to accept their services while dismissing them as inferior beings worthy only of menial labor. The truth was more humbling. Humanity had possessed something that all the advanced technology and superior intelligence of the major species could not replace: the patience and dedication to handle the unglamorous but essential work that kept civilization functioning. They had been willing to maintain aging systems, train local workers, and solve problems that others considered beneath their notice. Now they were gone, and the galaxy was learning what it meant to lose that quiet competence. The proud civilizations that had looked down on humanity were discovering that their impressive achievements meant nothing without the foundation of practical expertise that humans had provided. It would take decades or centuries to rebuild what had been lost, if it could be rebuilt at all. Many systems were so complex or so customized that recreating them from scratch might be impossible. The galaxy would have to learn to live with a lower level of technology and a simpler way of life. As her ship traveled through the darkness between stars, Thanera wondered where humanity had gone and what they were doing now. Were they building new colonies in unexplored regions of space? Were they developing technologies that would make galactic civilization look primitive? Or were they simply living quiet lives, free from the burden of maintaining other species' infrastructure? She hoped they were happy wherever they were. They had earned their freedom through centuries of faithful service, even if the galaxy had been too blind to appreciate their contributions. The age of galactic civilization was ending, brought down not by war or natural disaster, but by the simple absence of the people who had made it all possible.